Hey guys, today we have a fascinating topic, at least in my opinion, it is fascinating. And we'll go over what I presume to be basic types of mainstream minimalists. This is what you're going to see on blogs, on social media, on Pinterest, on Instagram. This is what you're going to read about, and this is what you're going to see on YouTube channels. And this comes from, I don't have the original source, but where I first saw this type of an article, and there's more than one of them floating around. This particular one I saw on apartmenttherapy.com, and I thought, what a fabulous idea for a video. Obviously, I'm putting a lot of my own spin on it, but the concept, it's been explored by people already. It's clearly quite an interesting way to think about the mainstream ideas of what minimalism is all about. And let's dive into it. Generally, minimalists can be kind of roughly shoved into one to two, sometimes three of these categories. None of them really define minimalism except for the last category, which is more philosophical minimalism. To me, reflections of what different people have for values and how minimalism kind of transpires in lives of different people. This is fascinating to think about because I really think that minimalism is a very versatile tool. You will have a lot of opinions about it being sort of a white man's only club, and it's absolutely false, and we'll discuss that also in a future video. This is a bit of a controversial topic, but a very interesting intellectual exercise, and exercise in cultural sensitivity as well. But let's get to the basic types of minimalists that you are going to encounter online. Number one is going to be for looksies. This is my category. I'm labeling it for looksies, but basically it is people who label themselves minimalists, and they might very well be minimalists because the definition is completely vague, and really whatever you feel like it can be, it can be. It's I can't say that they're not minimalists, but the focus of these folks is really on the aesthetics component of the movement. There is a certain look to minimalism, which obviously isn't really true. There's not one way that minimalism can look like, but this is what's been popularized in the media, and this is when you go to sort of create a minimalist inspiration board, that's what you're going to see. So this is a visual representation. So people who are very, very visually stimulated, visually oriented, you know, we all have different degrees of senses that integrate us into this world, and these visually stimulated people benefit the most from the visual concept of minimizing space, removing clutter. Our brains feel much better usually in a decluttered, clean space. There is some research to suggest that messiness might spark creativity, but really, really inconclusive data and very dodgy studies. So not really reliable. I would not rely on those results. For me personally, I noticed that I can't actually work or do anything productive in a very messy environment. But there might be people out there who can. I'm sure there are people who can. They have to, because that's how they live. Anyway, so aesthetic minimalism. What are we talking about here? We're talking about the all-white, clean spaces, futuristic, looks like it's part of the spaceship or the idea of what future would look like in the 60s. I mean, if you're watching this video, chances are that's what you think minimalism looks like, because that's what is mostly portrayed in the media. What are we talking about here? If you're a geek like myself, think Space Odyssey 2001 style. That's minimalism look that people are going for these days, which is very interesting and I actually quite enjoy. But seriously, keeping white surfaces completely spotless at all times, especially if you have a family or a pet, is a bit much. However, let's move on. Functional minimalism. Why am I a big proponent of minimalism? Is for two reasons, and I fall into two categories here, functional minimalism being one of them. This is to simplify your life in a way that objects do not. own or run your life. Only keeping what is actually helpful and useful, getting rid of things that aren't, in order to free up time, space, mental energy. And quite quite often we're so enslaved by our stuff that our lives really become run by the idea of maintaining our stuff, dusting our stuff, cleaning our stuff, upgrading our stuff. And functional minimalism really denotes the idea of, it's not about the looks, it's about the way things function around you. Keep what you need, clear out what you don't need so you don't have to take care of the crap that you don't actually use, and move on to a cleaner, safer, more productive space where things are serving you. That's function-based minimalist approach, and quite universally used, but the focus here really becomes on high quality. Because we don't own so many things, it becomes important that our things, A, work very well, because we don't have a backup, and B, last very well, because quite honestly, who has the time and the energy to replace this stuff all the time? Not to mention the financial resources it takes. However, functional minimalism can really become a bit of a trap for people who want to appear minimalists but don't really fall into the complete functional minimalism. And this desire for best quality possible, unfortunately, can result in over indulgence in purchasing, getting rid of things, always chasing the best possible thing you can have. And that's really, that's giving stuff way too much control over your life. So yes, there's a pitfall to functional minimalism, and that has to do with always chasing the best. Having really great quality stuff is definitely a hallmark of this particular type of minimalism, but the notion can become a little bit sickly if you do allow your mind to run away from you with it, as it does with everything, I suppose. Next point is the extreme minimalists and the nomads. I group them in the same category because the result of the extreme downsizing that both groups have to do really lends them into this kind of quite an extreme variety of minimalism. We're talking here about people who see the world in black and white and really gravitate towards extremes. These are people who probably had a problem with hoarding at one point or another, and now swung all the way to the other side of the spectrum, where they allow themselves to own a particular number of items, or they've downsized to carry only. The people who don't really need to go super extreme, but they feel the desire to. A lot of it has to do with the fact that it really makes them feel validated, and it makes them push their boundaries, push their limits, experiment with things in their life. This is one type, and the other type of pretty extreme minimalism is the nomads, the travelers, the people who live out of their backpack. And that's obviously more out of necessity, because you cannot lug your life around with you easily unless your life fits into a backpack. And these people really severely, extremely downsize because they do want to pursue that lifestyle. A lot of it is nomadic. A lot of it is really sort of go with the flow, very much experientially based. These are the people who value experiences far more than anything else in the world, and traveling tends to really be a hallmark of what they love doing a lot, and they do all the time. And the idea here is to be so detached from material possessions that you can do that pretty much full-time, if not completely full-time. Next category is the green minimalists. These are the people who make it a purpose for themselves in life to downsize and downgrade, downshift their life towards the use of minimal amount of resources. There's another category that is very similar, and oftentimes these guys are intertwined, but the green minimalists are the ones that are very very conscious of their environmental footprint onto the planet, and they try to minimize it as much as possible. Interestingly, oftentimes they try to minimize with the very mundane everyday things, but they will still fly to places, etc., and that's a huge environmental footprint. But they will try to reduce fuel use. They will go off grid on occasion. One lady I was watching, I can't remember the name of the channel right now, but it was a bit of a warm hole for me. I got trapped there on her channel, and very, very fascinating concepts. She took environmental minimalism very, very far, and she's also very, very frugal. And there are not a lot of people that I saw online who did do that, but they basically went toilet paper free. And not the bidet style, but we're going to make tiny little pieces of cloth to wipe our bums and then we'll wash them style. It can get to pretty extreme places sometimes. And I mean, first world problems, I consider that pretty extreme. But for green minimalism, I think it is a fairly extreme. Most people try to go sort of low waste or zero waste, and that's kind of where they land. But I mean, toilet paper, I think, is pretty out there. Very, very interesting and very worthwhile pursuit. However, like anything, it becomes a balance. So, I mean, toilet paper, maybe let's maybe keep that. The next category goes very well with the environmental category. It also goes very well with the functional category. So it's a good sort of adjunct, which is frugal minimalists. These are the people oftentimes who had either grown up as in very, very frugal environments, or had been in debt and struggled to repay those debts, and now try to save everything that they earn. So frugal minimalists are the people who try their absolute best to conserve every penny that is in their possession and be very, very, very mindful of their spending. There's certainly a component of that to functional minimalism as well, but frugalism really focuses on second-handing everything, and which is not always a bad idea. Actually, can be quite a good idea, especially when it comes to, say, vehicles, and really focuses on value, monetary value of things, which is a very interesting concept. And I think in our consumerist culture, in our culture of spending, very important to have an element of that in your approach. The pitfall for these guys is going to be the fact that they really do, contrary to most minimalists, keep things just in case. This in case mentality can backfire in terms of cluttering your space back up. However, I mean, it really is a choice, right? And the last category is more of a philosophical approach towards minimalism. And for me, that's one of the most important parts of actually considering yourself a minimalist. Because like I always say in my videos about this topic, it starts in here. This is where minimalism lives. It's not the stuff you have. It's not the stuff you don't have. It's not the stuff you throw out. It's not stuff at all. It has nothing to do with stuff. Decluttering or clearing up your space really is an expression of the internal processes that happen and make you more prone to experience the world in a more edited fashion, and experience your own thoughts and your own sort of existence in this more edited, more mindful, more deliberate way of life. So that's also, along with functional minimalism, where my interests lay. I care about why I'm doing these things, and there's no point on doing these things if you don't know why you're doing them. So the mindfulness behind the whole idea of minimalism and the understanding that you come to in digesting what it is that is most important to you and your goals clear and visible and achievable, that's where a lot of the benefit for long term is coming from, in my opinion. Pitfalls here. So there are many philosophies that you can be backing if you're trying to be more mindful about things. One example that is going to be interesting to discuss in the future separately is going to be the KonMariism, KonMari method. And this is just an organizer from Japan, a person who made a living organizing spaces. And her approach really has to do with this mindfulness about stuff and having like some kind of emotional connection to things, um, sparking joy, etc., etc. Like, I'm sure everybody's read KonMari, and I am so excited to discuss this in the future because I have so many thoughts regarding the KonMari method and the approach KonMari takes. It's not always the most practical, but I guess the pitfall here is sort of falling into, instead of following your own path, falling into a pinnacle of following these odd, somewhat impractical, on occasion, somewhat impractical philosophies or ways to do certain things, such as KonMariism, which I think is a way to do things, and an easy way to do things, and kind of an organic way to do things for people who had never thought through their purchases, their things, the things that they might not need or might need. So I guess it's an easy way to rely on your emotional state at the time to do the work for you. But I think minimalism is a much more cerebral, not a gut, follow the gut idea, but a much more cerebral approach, at least for me. Again, this can look different for different people, and maybe this intuitive approach it works very well for some. But for me, functionality is king, and a collection of useless crap that sparks joy is, I don't know, not really feasible, let's just say. However, we'll do a separate video on it, and we'll discuss the pros and cons of the KonMari method, because I think it actually can be very useful, but I think people take it very literally. And we'll discuss what it is that sort of ticks me off about it as well. And I'm allowed to have those opinions, and nobody needs to agree with me. It's just what I think. So here it is. These are the different types of minimalists that are out there, especially well represented by social media and YouTube and articles. And it's a fairly young revival of this kind of a movement. This is not a new concept at all. But these various substreams of minimalism are interesting to watch develop, and they kind of evolve into their own thing. Eventually they will. Now they're almost there. They're almost their own things. Tell me if you belong to a different stream than myself. Like I said, probably functional, mindful sort of mix. That's what I tend to go for. That's what makes sense and works for me and for my fairly analytical approach to life, but might not work for the intuitives out there who just want to sort of go with the flow. Anyway, let me know how you feel about these streams and what do you have to say about them. Do you think that popularizing minimalism online had done a disservice to the community, or do you think it's a good thing that now we have these fairly artificial little streams or branches of the movement? And what do you think of them? I'm curious to know. I pretty much shared what I thought. And that's it for today. Have a good day. See you later. Bye-bye.